So now we're moving into chapter 38 and kind of picking up where the Spanish encountered the indigenous Tainos or Arawaks, where Columbus had set sail and landed. They were originally from South America and took the rivers into the Caribbean Sea and settled there. So Columbus established Hispaniola, which is modern-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic, as a base for trading with the Tainos. Fortunately, the Tainos, we thought they were Indians, but they didn't have spices or silk, which is what the Europeans really wanted. So he essentially forced them to work into mining gold, and it created the encomienda system. The encomienda system was essentially forced labor or slavery as we know it. It's just a Spanish term for it. But the obligation in the encomienda system was for the Spanish overlords to essentially take care of the people that were working, the Tainos. But the Tainos were forced to work in mining and perform heavy labor. They didn't have much of a choice, but they had to look after the welfare, the encomenderos. They'd look after the welfare and encourage the conversion to Christianity for the Tainos. So I was kind of justifying it for them, I guess. So with mining not really being terribly profitable in the Caribbean, the Spanish have to turn to plantation agriculture. But the Tainos would occasionally rebel and fight against their Spanish overlords, but unfortunately the Spanish were just militarily superior to the bow and arrow equipped Tainos and spears. Also, smallpox would kill most of the population. So as workers began to die from smallpox, you can't just compel them to work. Now the Spanish were launching raids to kidnap people and work for them. So you're starting to see expansion of this slave labor, the encomendero system, encomienda system in the Caribbean. So Taino society would essentially be gone by the mid-16th century. Not a very long time before they were essentially killed by the Spanish because of disease and forced labor. So we just saw culture pretty much eradicated in this region. Also, with the limited gold production, they have to exploit it for something new in the Caribbean. And the Caribbean today is known for sugarcane, still is today. So the Caribbean would see a massive importation of slaves from Africa to support this plantation movement. So as the Europeans and Spanish have kind of exhausted the Caribbean, they set their sights towards the mainland, so to speak, in Central America. So they come as conquistadors. The Spanish conquistadores explore other territories. Hernan Cortes, probably the most well-known one, him and Pizarro. Cortes brought down the Aztec Empire. We just said those 16 million people with 450 men. He brought down that empire in 2 years. And a lot of it had to do with smallpox, although there's some debate over really, was it smallpox or was it a massive famine? We can't really know for sure, but disease definitely played a part in it. So the city of Tenochtitlan was brought down by disease and smallpox. But also, Hernan Cortes played on the emotions of a lot of the local tribes who were under the tributary system, as we talked about before, of the Aztecs. They were giving their own people up for human sacrifice. They were just having to pay massive payments of tribute to the capital of Tenochtitlan. So he had them ally with him, and he fought the Aztecs. Francisco Pizarro did much of the same thing. With 600, he was able to bring down the Peruvian Inca Empire in 1533. So essentially, he tricked the Inca rulers by calling them all together, the major ones, and essentially massacred them all. There's a picture of it on page 597 showing Atahualpa being essentially executed by strangulation, and then he was beheaded. But I'm pretty sure he was just strangled. And I don't think he was necessarily strangled in the manner depicted, but he was strangled to death. So the Inca Empire was brought down in much the same manner. Here is Cortes greeting the Aztec leader Montezuma, as we know him today. Spanish colonial administration. So after the fall of these two major empires, you start to see that these conquistadores are looking to spread and expand the Spanish Empire. Um, and they had their own self-interest as well. So Spanish administration was in New Spain, which is Mexico, and New Castile in Peru, and it extended all the way to Florida in the east and south to Buenos Aires in Argentina. Quite an expansive amount of territory that they had gathered as a result of their expansionist policies. In fact, Tenochtitlan is now Mexico City. Lima was the new capital of Peru. It was in Cusco. Cusco was too high elevation for the Mediterranean-style Spaniards. They didn't like that, so they moved down to the coastline. They liked the ocean. Viceroys would rule, which are essentially governors in these areas, but they were supervised by local courts called audiencias, which were courts that pretty much were supplied by university professors or individuals at universities who would look to see that if the laws being passed in these local colonies and local administrations were looking to build up local power bases, or if they were still loyal to the king. So you'd see all these disputes going back and forth between Spain and the new cities, or the new, not new cities, but new colonies in the New World. That would eventually lead to a lot of revolutions we'd see later. So here you see it. This is Spanish possession by this time, quite expansive. The Portuguese were also colonizing as well. So 1494, there was a treaty signed that divided the world between Portugal and Spain, the entire non-Christian world between Portugal and Spain. So it was pretty much put forth by the Pope to resolve a conflict between the two. So Portugal would essentially get Brazil, which they had little interest in at first, but they decided that when sugar could be grown in these areas, that it had value. And they also said it had value when the Dutch and the English started to look at these places, and the French even started to look at the area around Brazil, and they're like, oh, we can't let other Europeans come in and get a piece of this pie, so we got to kick them out and just take Brazil for ourselves. So here's the Treaty of Tordesillas. The original one's a papal division. That's what the Pope said. Hey, this is the territory you're going to get, Portugal. Anything non-Christian to the east is yours, Portugal. Anything non-Christian to the west is yours, Spain. But Portugal was a little bit worried about the fact that they didn't have Brazil, so they said, can we move the line a little bit west? And they did. They agreed to it. So the Spanish pretty much got the entirety of the New World, and the Old World, well, that went to Portugal. So you also saw the establishment of settler colonies in North America. The southern portion of North America would be Spanish, of course. Texas, Texas where we are today, is highly influenced by Spanish, where they set up missions. So missionaries would be on the east coast of North America, some on the west coast. So the oldest city in the United States is St. Augustine in Florida. It was established in 1530 something, I think, 1565. So a lot of these territories would be, especially in the north part of North America, would go to the French, English, and the Dutch as well. The Dutch would establish New Amsterdam in 1623. It wouldn't last long. It would be taken by the English in 1664 and named New York after the city of York in England. But the French would capture Nova Scotia in eastern Canada, as well as Quebec. That's why you still see French-speaking people in these areas today. Jamestown will be colonized by the English, as well as Massachusetts Bay Colony. So you start to see the establishment of other European colonies, northern European colonies, a little further north, kind of on the same latitude as their European brothers. But there would be difficult conditions for a lot of these new colonies, especially in Jamestown. Starvation would be rampant. Cannibalism would actually be practiced in some cases. And you have the famous Roanoke colony, where you see Croatoan, carved into the tree, and there's people are still wondering what the heck that means. But it's quite difficult because they had to rely on provisions from Europe, and they didn't know how to grow crops. A lot of your, Western or your old world crops aren't going to grow in these places. And that's all they knew how to do. So that's why we get the stories of the English learning much from the natives, and they did. They learned how to grow a lot of things that were local to the Americas via the natives. Quite important. So you also saw. Okay, this is another picture of European colonies. There's nothing really in the Rockies just yet, but you can see some competition between these guys. So relations with indigenous people, North American people, where not in Latin America, were loosely organized and migratory, whereas the Aztec and Inca were settled societies. They relied on agriculture. They weren't not hunter gatherers. They weren't constantly on the move. They weren't nomadic. And a lot of Europeans are settled people, and when they're staking out forested land and clearing it for agriculture and taking lots of land from migratory people, that's going to be quite problematic in terms of conflict between European colonists and North American tribespeople. And you can see that in this picture of Jamestown. As you can see, the colony of Jamestown is surrounded by a wooden palisade, and that just indicates that they're defending themselves. They are afraid of the tribespeople outside there. I mean, even if you look, Powhatan in the top right, and his tribespeople, the Powhatan tribe, he's got this kind of ominous presence up there. He doesn't look like he's very friendly in this painting. So the relationship between natives and English was tenuous at best. So they would constantly displace indigenous people and trespass on their hunting grounds, and they would establish these treaties to say, okay, you have this, we have this, but they would often be difficult for the natives to understand, and as a result, you would see an increasing conflict between the two. And you'd see raids by natives to take back land and to acquire territory, but they would oftentimes be afflicted by disease. So from 1500 to 1800, we're using that kind of period of dates to see population changes. You see a significant drop in native populations and a significant increase in European, but also African populations. So you'd see the development of multicultural societies, especially in Latin America, so Mexico all the way down to South America. European and African migrants were primarily men. Especially in the Portuguese colonies, there wasn't many women that came with them from the homelands. So relationships with native women would form, and thus you would see a mestizo or mixed society forming, people of Spanish and native parentage. So you'd have mixed children. You would also have Spaniards having relationships and children with their African slaves. So this is a dated term, but this was the term used at the time. You see the creation of mulattoes, our new group of people in the Americas. And then you'd also see African slaves and natives. So you'd have this real multicultural society forming, especially in Mexico. Not so much in Peru, but mostly in Mexico. So because of this, you'd see a race-based hierarchy, with the top being pure people who are from the Iberian Peninsula. Pure meaning that they're both from Portugal or Spain, the Iberian Peninsula. Creoles were the children of migrants, so two migrant parents, both from Spain or Portugal, who had children. They would be known as Creoles. Mestizos and mulattos and zambos and other combinations of heritage would be the next rung, and then the last would be the conquered native people as well as slaves. The Spanish casta system would be, they had their own caste system, as we just saw. As you can see, from left to right, a Spaniard, his mixed child, a mestizo, and then a native woman, native wife of his. Now, North American societies had a higher ratio and a better ratio of English male and females. Thus, there was more stigma attached with having children with natives or slaves. But fur traders in North America, who were oftentimes men who worked in these rugged conditions, did have children with natives.